If the man who betrayed his pregnant wife believed she would crawl back to him with nothing left, then why did the world's most powerful billionaire secretly send a private jet for a woman everyone else thought was powerless? The laughter echoing through the ballroom should have sounded like music, but to Emma Weston, it was a dagger to the heart. Everywhere she turned, the eyes of New York's richest and most ruthless followed her. Some filled with pity, most with open curiosity. She stood at the very edge of the dance floor, trying to disappear into the wallpaper, one hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. The silk of her dress, a hand-me-down from a friend, felt too tight, and the heat in the room was suffocating. The air was thick with the sense of money and Chanel No. 5, with laughter that was always a little too loud, and glances that were always a little too sharp. But none of that compared to the humiliation burning inside her, the shame that made her want to turn and run, even though she knew there was nowhere to go. 6 months pregnant, Emma felt more alone than she ever had in her entire life. And at the center of it all stood Andrew Weston, her soon-to-be ex-husband, the man she'd once trusted with her life, her dreams, and now the future of their unborn child. He looked every inch the Wall Street golden boy tonight. His dark hair perfectly styled, tuxedo sharp enough to cut, a glass of champagne in one hand, and his new girlfriend, if you could call a 23-year-old influencer with legs for days and morals for sale a girlfriend, in the other. Andrew was holding court, laughing, telling jokes, basking in the attention as if he had just landed on the Forbes cover, not just finalized the paperwork to end his marriage. Emma tried to stay hidden in the shadows, but it was impossible. The gala was the event of the year. 300 people, 1,000 flashes, and 1,000,000 reasons to show up and be seen. For years, she'd been the one at Andrew's side, smiling for the photographers, helping him schmooze investors and charm board members. Tonight, she was an afterthought. No, not even that. She was the butt of the joke. She heard the whispers as she walked by. "That's her? I thought she'd gone back to Pennsylvania already. She looks so tired. I heard he cut her off. Poor thing, pregnant and broke." She gripped her clutch tighter, feeling the sting behind her eyes. She wanted to scream, to shout that none of it was true, that she was not weak, not finished, not some charity case for the vultures circling the ballroom. But the truth was, she was scared, alone, and she didn't know what would come next. Just then, laughter erupted near the bar. A high, cold sound, unmistakable even above the music. Emma glanced over and saw Andrew, hand on his mistress's hip, telling a story to a group of men in $1,000 suits. "She'll beg to come back," he declared, grinning. "Mark my words. Women like her, they can't survive on their own. She's just a housewife with a belly and no prospects. She'll be crawling back before the baby's born." His mistress laughed and ran her fingers through his hair. The group erupted in knowing chuckles. Emma's cheeks burned. She thought she might be sick. She almost turned to run, her vision swimming with humiliation and rage, but at that exact moment her phone buzzed inside her clutch. It was a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Weston, your jet is ready. Please proceed to the private terminal. Everything you need is waiting." She stared at the screen, certain it must be a mistake or some cruel prank. She hadn't told anyone she was at the gala, and she definitely hadn't arranged for a jet. Who could possibly be reaching out to her now, at her lowest moment? She looked up just in time to catch Andrew's eye from across the room. His smirk was cruel, satisfied. His arm around Lila's waist was a victory pose. Emma knew what he was thinking. She had nothing left. Nowhere to go. No cards left to play. But Emma's pride wouldn't let her break. She took a deep breath, shoulders back, chin high, and walked through the ballroom as if she were floating above it all. With each step, she remembered every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every piece of herself she had given up for Andrew's dreams. Tonight, she walked away from all of it. She walked past the staring eyes, past the sneers and the whispers, and didn't look back. Outside, the night was shockingly cold, the city lights smeared with rain. For a moment, Emma hesitated on the steps. She was scared. But somewhere deep inside her, a spark flickered. Maybe this was what freedom looked like. Maybe this was what starting over felt like. Her phone buzzed again. "Your driver is waiting. Terminal C. Ask for Mr. Gold." Emma took a shaky breath, wrapped her coat around her shoulders, and stepped out into the night. She was no longer the wife left behind at a party for someone else's future. She was a woman on the verge of becoming someone new. She clutched her belly, feeling the baby kick, a reminder that she was never truly alone. Back inside, Andrew didn't even notice she was gone. He toasted his friends, certain of his victory. "She'll be back," he said, as cameras flashed and the music swelled. "She's got nowhere else to go." He was wrong. In that moment, a jet waited for Emma Weston on the tarmac. A new beginning, a new world, and a secret about herself even she didn't fully understand. The joke was on him now, because tonight, Emma would become the story, and nothing would ever be the same. Emma Weston had always thought of herself as ordinary. Not plain, not simple. Just someone who never asked for much. Never tried to steal the spotlight. She'd been a bookworm as a child, happiest in the quiet corners of the school library or with her hands in the garden dirt at her parents' little farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania. Her life had always been about hard work, kindness, and the belief that good things came to people who kept going, even when things were tough. She never expected a life like the one she found with Andrew. He was dazzling from the start. Smart, witty, handsome in a classic old Hollywood way. They met at a college networking mixer in Philadelphia. Emma, then 19, had gone as a favor to a friend. She barely knew how to talk to strangers, let alone someone as confident as Andrew. But he made her feel seen. He listened when she spoke. For the first time, she felt special, even if she couldn't quite believe it would last. The whirlwind was dizzying. Dinners at candlelit restaurants, flowers sent to her dorm, endless conversations about their dreams for the future. Andrew talked about moving to New York, about making a name for himself in finance, about building a life that would be the envy of everyone back home. Emma was swept away by his ambition, his hunger. He called her the heart behind the hustle, told her that together they could conquer anything. Their wedding, 2 years later, was small but beautiful. Emma wore a dress borrowed from her cousin. Andrew's family flew in from Boston, bringing enough champagne to keep everyone smiling for days. They moved into a shoebox apartment in Queens, scraping by on Andrew's first analyst salary and Emma's part-time job at a children's bookstore. It wasn't glamorous, but Emma loved it. She made their place feel like home, cooking dinners in a tiny kitchen and writing little notes for Andrew to find before his early morning commutes. As Andrew climbed the corporate ladder, everything changed. The apartments got bigger, the parties fancier. Emma learned how to navigate society events, how to smile and shake hands, how to keep quiet about the loneliness creeping in around the edges. Andrew's hours grew longer, his promises more fleeting. Emma poured herself into their home, organizing charity drives, volunteering, and waiting up at night for him to come home. She believed that being supportive was what a good wife did. She had always imagined herself as a mother. She pictured a life filled with little footsteps, bedtime stories, and laughter echoing through sunlit rooms. When she found out she was pregnant, it felt like her whole world had snapped back into color. Andrew had seemed happy at first. He hugged her tightly, told her this was the next step for their legacy. For a brief moment, Emma let herself believe that their family was coming together, that the distance between them would finally shrink. But with every week that passed, Andrew's attention wandered further away. He was always working, always traveling, always just out of reach. When Emma tried to talk to him, to tell him about her fears or her hopes for their child, he brushed her off with a distracted kiss or a quick promise to make it up to her. The man who once told her she was his whole world now barely seemed to notice when she was in the room. And then there were the secrets. The late-night texts, the unexplained charges, the cold, dismissive attitude whenever she asked questions. Emma found herself shrinking, trying to take up less and less space. She thought if she was quieter, more understanding, less demanding, Andrew would come back to her. She tried to be the perfect wife, hosting dinner parties, keeping up appearances, making excuses for him to friends and family who started to notice the cracks. It was the day she found a lipstick-stained napkin in his jacket pocket that everything changed. It wasn't hers. She sat on the edge of their bed for a long time, heart pounding, mind racing through every memory and every warning sign she had tried to ignore. She felt like she was losing herself, piece by piece, to a story she hadn't chosen. When she finally confronted Andrew, he didn't bother to deny it. He laughed, said she was overreacting, told her that men like him had needs, and if she couldn't handle it, maybe she wasn't cut out for life at the top. The next morning, her bank account was frozen, her credit cards declined. She was left in their penthouse apartment, alone, pregnant, and suddenly invisible to the only man she had ever loved. Emma moved out with nothing but a suitcase and a box of baby clothes. She found a friend willing to rent her a spare room in Brooklyn. Gone were the days of fancy galas and catered dinners. Emma worked odd jobs, did freelance bookkeeping, and tried not to panic when her baby kicked at night and she wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. But what Andrew never knew, and what Emma barely let herself remember, was that she wasn't as powerless as he thought. Her late grandmother had left her a small inheritance, one she had tucked away for years, untouched. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to keep her afloat while she figured out what to do next. She used it to quietly rebuild, paying for prenatal appointments, buying groceries, and keeping the lights on. In the darkest moments, Emma held on to one truth. She was more than just a wife, more than just a victim. She was a survivor. And the world hadn't seen the last of her. Not even close. The Heart of the City Gala was more than just another charity event. It was the city's ultimate social battlefield. Under the crystal glow of the Hotel Astoria's legendary ballroom, fortunes were made, deals were sealed, and reputations were destroyed with a single whispered rumor. To outsiders, it looked like a fairy tale, all elegance and sparkling lights. To Emma, it was a cage. Emma had spent countless nights in this very room, playing the loyal wife beside Andrew as he chased donors and courted the press. She'd organized silent auctions, written thank-you notes to CEOs, and stood smiling for 1,000 photographs she would never see. But tonight, she wasn't on Andrew's arm. She was a ghost drifting among strangers, clinging to the last shreds of dignity she had left. She entered the ballroom alone, unsure if she belonged at all. The doorman barely glanced at her invitation, and nobody greeted her as she walked in. Emma caught her reflection in a gilded mirror. A little pale, a little tired, but standing tall. She forced herself to breathe and stepped further inside, head held high. Every table was a diorama of New York privilege. Diamond necklaces shimmered against bare skin. Men in hand-tailored tuxedos talked business and money and the next big thing. Waiters glided past, carrying silver trays heavy with oysters and champagne. On the far side of the room, the mayor posed for selfies with a tech billionaire's wife. This was Andrew's world, and for years it had been hers too. But now everything had changed. Emma noticed how the conversation shifted as she passed by. People stared, then looked away. The same women she'd once called friends now whispered behind manicured hands. She was no longer the it girl on Andrew's arm, but a cautionary tale. The wife who lost everything. The woman who couldn't keep her husband. Emma straightened her back and kept moving. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Across the room, Andrew played the part of the charming host. His tuxedo fit him like a second skin, his hair styled just so, his smile effortless. Lila, his new girlfriend, clung to his arm, every inch the ingenue, young, gorgeous, and dripping in borrowed diamonds. Andrew introduced her as "my future" to anyone who would listen, not caring that Emma could hear every word. He laughed a little too loudly, posed for the cameras, and made sure the entire room saw just how happy he was. Emma watched from a distance, wishing she could disappear. The urge to run was overwhelming. She wanted to escape this theater of cruelty, to be anywhere but here, surrounded by reminders of everything she had lost. But something inside her, a stubborn spark, kept her rooted in place. She wasn't just here for Andrew, she was here for herself, to reclaim the dignity he had tried to steal. As the night wore on, the tension in the room thickened. The orchestra played a waltz, couples twirled beneath the chandeliers, and Emma found herself stranded by the buffet table, alone. A familiar face approached, her old friend and former neighbor, Olivia Hartwell. Olivia's eyes were kind, but wary, as if she didn't quite know which side to be on. "Emma, hi," Olivia said, voice soft. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," Emma admitted, trying to smile. "You look good," Olivia lied. "Are you holding up okay?" Emma nodded, unwilling to say more. She knew the rules of this world, never show weakness. Olivia hesitated, then squeezed Emma's arm. "If you ever need anything, you know where to find me," she said, and then she was gone, swept away by the tide of more powerful people. Emma found a quiet corner and tried to steady herself. She was tired, so tired, but she refused to leave. Not yet. She let her gaze wander across the ballroom, landing once more on Andrew and Lila, now surrounded by cameras and reporters. Andrew caught her eye for a split second. There was no apology in his gaze, only smug satisfaction, as if he had won, and she was just another piece of collateral damage. That was when Emma heard the laughter. Loud, unmistakable, and meant for her. Lila was telling a story, her voice pitched to Carrie. She really thought he'd never leave her. Poor thing. I mean, look at her, she's barely holding it together. The circle of people around them laughed, not even bothering to hide it. Emma's cheeks burned. The humiliation was almost too much. For a moment, she swayed on her feet, dizzy with rage and hurt. She pressed her hand to her stomach and closed her eyes, reminding herself to breathe. The baby kicked, a flutter of hope in the darkness. Suddenly, the world shifted. Emma realized she had nothing left to lose. She was already the subject of gossip. She was already outcast. But she was still standing. No matter what Andrew or Lila said, she was not defeated. In that instant, she felt something inside her harden, resolve, not bitterness. She would not let them write her story. As midnight approached, Emma checked her phone. The mysterious message was still there. "Your jet is ready. Terminal C. Ask for Mr. Gold." It was crazy, it was reckless, but it was hers. She took one last look around the ballroom, the place where her marriage had ended, where her humiliation had peaked, and then she turned and walked out, head high. For the first time in a long time, Emma Weston felt the future rushing up to meet her, and she was not afraid. For most of the city, Andrew Weston was the golden boy. Ambitious, clever, charming in that effortless, old money way. People trusted his handshakes and followed his advice. They called him a visionary, a leader, a family man. He cultivated the perfect image, never letting anyone see the shadows lurking just behind his polished smile. But the man Emma had once married was gone. Or maybe, she thought as she rode away from the gala in the back of a silent car, he had never truly existed. Maybe she'd only fallen in love with a fantasy, the kind of fantasy Andrew spun so well. Inside the ballroom, Andrew basked in the afterglow of his social victory. His phone vibrated endlessly with texts. "Congratulations, stunning couple. Where did you find her?" For hours he played the perfect host, introducing Lila as his inspiration, his reason to believe in love again. She giggled on cue, holding his hand as if she were afraid he might float away. Lila Monroe was nothing if not ambitious. She'd grown up in Miami, one of 3 daughters in a house where beauty was a weapon and ambition was currency. At 23, she already knew how to charm a man, how to twist his words into gifts, and how to draw the eye of every woman in the room, if only to inspire envy. With Andrew, she'd found her perfect mark. Older, successful, newly single, and so desperate to prove he could trade in his old life for something younger and brighter. But Lila's charm was a double-edged sword. She was skilled at playing the perfect girlfriend, adoring in public, flirtatious at just the right moment, a little bit wild but never out of control. She whispered jokes in Andrew's ear and touched his shoulder possessively, always making sure the world saw them as a couple. But beneath the flawless surface, she was calculating, always searching for her next advantage. Andrew thrived on this new energy. He told himself he deserved happiness, that Emma was holding him back, that he'd done everything right and still gotten the short end of the stick. He didn't feel guilty for what he'd done. In fact, he felt vindicated. "She'll beg to come back," he'd bragged more than once. "She's nothing without me." He even made a bet with Lila, standing at the balcony above the gala dance floor, their drinks sweating in the humid summer air. "How long do you give her before she calls?" he asked, smirking. Lila took a sip of her champagne, her eyes shining with mischief. "2 days," she said. "She looks like she's never worked a real job in her life." "Where's she gonna go, Andrew? You're the best thing that ever happened to her." Andrew grinned, emboldened. 3 days max. She'll crawl back, and I'll make her beg for it. Just watch." Neither of them thought twice about the woman whose life they'd just torn apart. To them, Emma was the past, a dull shadow, a burden best forgotten. They didn't see the strength brewing beneath her silence. They didn't realize she was already halfway out the door, carving a future for herself and the baby growing inside her. Later that night, in the quiet of their hotel suite, Lila checked her social media. Dozens of new followers. Hundreds of likes. She snapped a selfie of her and Andrew in bed, captioned with a single heart emoji. She sent it to her private group chat, and the replies rolled in. "You did it, girl. That's the Weston's penthouse, right? OMG, you're really living her life." Lila smiled. She liked this version of herself. Powerful, desired, envied. Andrew showered, changed into designer loungewear, and poured himself a glass of whiskey. He was already planning his next move. He imagined the headlines, "Weston reinvented." His tragic divorce would be spun into a redemption story, a man who'd found happiness after heartbreak, who'd traded up for a life more exciting. He knew how this city worked. Image was everything, and he was always 2 steps ahead. He never once considered that Emma might be the one writing the next chapter. The next morning, Andrew awoke to another flurry of press. His face was everywhere, smiling with Lila, laughing with investors, living the good life. The tabloids called Lila the new queen of Wall Street. Andrew's phone was full of invitations, offers, and flattery. He basked in the attention, convinced he had finally won. But as he sat on the balcony, sipping his coffee, a nagging thought tugged at the edges of his mind. Emma had not called. She hadn't texted. No angry emails, no desperate voicemails. He expected tears, or at least a demand for money. But the only thing in his inbox was a brief message from her lawyer confirming the divorce papers had been filed. He mentioned it to Lila over breakfast, trying to sound unconcerned. "I just think it's weird," he said, poking at his omelet. "She's so quiet. She's not even fighting me on the settlement. It's almost like she's just disappeared." Lila shrugged, unbothered. Maybe she finally got the message. Maybe she's just embarrassed. Who cares? She's old news. We're the story now, babe. Andrew tried to agree. He told himself he didn't care, that Emma was nothing to him now. But deep down, the silence unsettled him. He liked his women predictable. He liked being the one in control. And Emma, with her quiet dignity and stubborn resilience, was suddenly an unknown variable in a game he thought he'd already won. Neither Andrew nor Lila realized just how quickly their luck was about to change, or that the nobody they'd cast aside would soon be at the center of the city's biggest scandal. If the betrayal in private had been sharp, the humiliation in public was suffocating. The city's news cycle thrived on scandal, and Andrew Weston knew how to feed it. Before Emma could catch her breath, the morning after the gala, her face was splashed across 6 tabloid websites. Weston's wife left in the cold, Wall Street tycoon moves on with younger flame, and the one headline she couldn't escape, the ex who can't let go. At first, Emma thought it would pass, a 24-hour circus, nothing more. She tried to ignore her phone, but it buzzed all morning with texts from friends, family, and acquaintances who had read the stories. Some were kind, checking if she was all right. Others sent thinly veiled curiosity masked as concern. A few messages were cruel. "Bet you wish you'd tried harder," one read. "Should have known he'd never settle for someone like you." Every time Emma stepped outside, she felt the eyes. At the grocery store, the pharmacy, even walking down her new block in Brooklyn, people whispered. Strangers seemed to recognize her, her swollen belly and the tired circles under her eyes. She kept her head down, sunglasses on, and her world small. She spent her days working remote accounting jobs, stretching the small inheritance from her grandmother to cover rent, food, and doctor's appointments. The worst came a week after the gala, when a glossy magazine published a photo spread from the event. There was Andrew, arm draped around Lila, both beaming. Emma stood alone at the edge of the frame, blurry, out of focus, a ghost at her own funeral. The caption underneath cut deeper than any headline. "Some women lose gracefully. Others just lose." That night, Emma sat at the kitchen table in her friend's tiny apartment, scrolling through comment sections she knew she should ignore. The vitriol was endless. What did she expect, letting herself go? He traded up. She should have seen it coming. Single mom in New York? She'll be back, begging, just wait. A wave of despair nearly swallowed her. She pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling her baby turn. For the first time since leaving Andrew, she let herself cry, tears falling silently onto the kitchen table. She cried for the future she'd lost, for the love that had curdled into something poisonous, for the sense of safety she no longer had. She cried until the pain was washed clean by exhaustion and the tiniest flicker of something else, anger. Because beneath the grief was a rising, cold fury. She hadn't asked for this war, but she would not let herself be destroyed by it. Emma looked around the little kitchen, cramped, cluttered, but safe. She remembered her mother's words from years ago, "Never let them decide your worth, honey. You know who you are." Emma decided that night she would not be a punchline. She would not be the sad, defeated ex-wife Andrew and Lila expected her to become. If this was rock bottom, she would use it as her foundation. Andrew, meanwhile, was enjoying his reign at the top. He gave interviews, smiling for the cameras, spinning the narrative in his favor. "Sometimes people grow apart," he told a primetime anchor. "I wish Emma nothing but the best." Privately, he sent her a final email, subject line, "For your own good. Emma, I'm sorry it had to end this way. I'll cover your rent for 2 more months. After that, you'll need to figure things out. I'll handle the baby's expenses if you cooperate. No need for lawyers, just do what's right for everyone. You'll thank me later." Emma read the message 3 times, her hands trembling. There was no apology in his words, only arrogance. He believed truly that she was helpless without him. He believed truly that her humiliation would break her. She wanted to reply, to tell him just how wrong he was, but instead, she deleted the email and blocked his number. She was done begging. She was done playing by rules he'd written. Days passed. Emma focused on rebuilding. She joined support groups for single mothers, found small freelance projects, and started attending business networking events. She bought a second-hand laptop with the last of her inheritance and quietly began to plan a way forward. For the first time in months, hope flickered in her chest. And then, late one night, her phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "Your jet is still waiting. Terminal C. Please respond if you're ready for a new beginning." Emma stared at the message. The urge to dismiss it as a scam was strong. But something about it, some whisper of possibility, called to her. She looked at her baby bump, then out the window at the city lights. Maybe it was crazy. Maybe it was the only way out. The next morning, as Andrew and Lila enjoyed brunch in the penthouse, news broke of a mysterious woman flying first class on a private jet out of Teterboro, destination unknown. Tabloids speculated, but none guessed the truth. For Emma, it was not an escape, it was a return to herself. She left her humiliation behind in New York. Ahead was the first chapter she would write on her own terms. Emma never believed she could fall so far so quickly. The night she left New York was a blur. 1 minute sitting in her friend's kitchen with nothing but a half-eaten sandwich and the glow of her cracked phone, the next bundled into the back of a sleek black car heading toward a private airport. The city slipped past her window, neon lights blurred by tears. Every street was a memory. Late-night walks with Andrew, her favorite bakery, the playground she dreamed of taking her child to someday. Every heartbeat was heavy with loss. At Teterboro, everything felt surreal. The uniformed driver guided her to a private jet. She expected some rich man's prank or an embarrassing mistake. She almost turned around more than once. But at the stairs, a tall, gray-haired man in a tailored suit greeted her. "Miss Weston, I'm Mr. Gold. You're expected." His voice was calm, kind, reassuring. Emma was silent the entire flight. She barely touched the gourmet meal placed in front of her, couldn't sleep on the plush recliner, and flinched every time the baby kicked. She kept replaying the last month in her mind. Andrew's betrayal, the whispers at the gala, her own face in the tabloids, the emails, the texts, the shame. It felt like her identity was slipping through her fingers. For years, she'd built her life around being the perfect wife. And now, stripped of that role, she didn't know who she was anymore. The jet landed just after sunrise in a city she didn't recognize. A skyline filled with glass and steel, but unfamiliar, intimidating. Mr. Gold ushered her into another car, handed her a folder, and explained as they drove, "You've been offered sanctuary. Your privacy and security are guaranteed here. There are people waiting who care about your future." Emma didn't understand. She barely listened as he explained that everything had been arranged. A safe apartment, a generous monthly stipend, new legal representation, even prenatal care at one of the best clinics in the country. It was like stepping into someone else's life. a life where she wasn't haunted by humiliation or fear. But that didn't mean the pain went away. For the first few days, Emma hardly left her new apartment. She stared at the ceiling, numb, letting the hours slip by. She barely ate. She scrolled through old photos, sometimes bursting into tears at the sight of herself smiling with Andrew, with friends, at baby shower gifts she would never open. She was haunted by doubt. Was this her fault? Had she been too naive, too trusting? Was she destined to fail on her own? She barely answered her phone when it rang, but her mother's name flashed one afternoon, and Emma let herself pick up. "Honey, where are you?" Her mom's voice trembled with worry. Emma's voice was small. "I left. I had to. I can't go back, Mom." There was a pause, then her mother said quietly, "You did the right thing, Emma. It's not your fault. You're not alone. I'm so proud of you." That night, Emma let herself grieve. She let the pain wash over her in waves. She cried until her throat was raw, until her eyes stung, until she finally collapsed into exhausted sleep. In her dreams, she saw Andrew and Lila laughing, the city judging her, her own child reaching for her hand. She woke with a scream, shaking, heart pounding, and wondered if the pain would ever leave her. Days became a blur. Emma forced herself to eat, to shower, to get dressed. She saw a therapist arranged by Mr. Gold, a gentlewoman named Dr. Chen, who listened without judgment. Emma spilled everything, her fears, her anger, her guilt. "You have been through a trauma," Dr. Chen told her. "It's okay to not be okay. You're allowed to fall apart. The important thing is that you're still here." But it wasn't easy. Every news headline about Andrew and Lila felt like another slap. The tabloids ran stories about their new beginning. A glossy feature appeared, photos of Lila on Andrew's arm, dressed in Emma's old jewelry, lounging in Emma's old home. The public, it seemed, had chosen their winner. Emma felt the old panic rise every time she saw her reflection. She barely recognized herself. She felt lost, between lives, between identities, between hope and despair. She wanted to be strong for her baby, but most days she felt weak, helpless, unworthy of anything good. One evening, a storm rattled the windows of her new home. She stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching lightning flicker across the sky. The power flickered, and for a moment, the world outside disappeared, leaving only her and the baby. She whispered, "I'm sorry," again and again, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't know how to do this alone." But as the thunder faded, so did the terror. Emma felt something shift inside her. Not hope, not yet, but the smallest seed of resolve. She remembered her mother's words, "You're not alone." She thought of the kindness in Mr. Gold's eyes, the calm in Dr. Chen's voice, the tiny life inside her still growing, still fighting. She took a shaky breath and stood a little taller. She might be lost, she might be scared, but she was not defeated. Not yet. She would keep moving, step by tiny step, until she found herself again. Outside, the storm finally broke, and the city was washed clean. Emma stood at the window of her new apartment, watching the city below as the sky turned pink with the early morning sun. For days she'd been barely existing, drifting between grief and exhaustion, feeling like an exile in her own life. But something was shifting inside her. The endless tears had run dry. The questions, why me, why now, were replaced by a new one. What if this wasn't the end? What if it was only the beginning? A gentle knock sounded at her door just after breakfast. Emma opened it to find Mr. Gold standing in the hallway, crisp as always, carrying a thick envelope. "Miss Weston, do you have a moment?" His voice was respectful, never pushy. Emma nodded and let him in, curiosity mingling with wariness. He sat across from her at the little kitchen table and placed the envelope between them. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said softly. "It's time to remember who you are and what you're entitled to." He slid the envelope toward her. Emma opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a stack of documents, legal papers, account statements, a birth certificate, and a letter in her grandmother's familiar looping script. The sight of that handwriting made Emma's heart ache with sudden longing. She read the letter slowly, tears stinging her eyes. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, it means you're at a crossroads. I always knew you were stronger than you thought, and I never wanted you to be dependent on anyone. You are the heir to my estate, not just the savings I left in trust, but the controlling shares in the companies your grandfather and I built over 40 years. These are yours. I hope you never need them. But if you do, use them with the wisdom and kindness you've always shown. The lawyers will help you. You are not alone." Grandma Emma sat back, stunned. She had known about a small inheritance, but this was different. There were account numbers with balances she could barely comprehend, ownership papers for properties around the world. And attached to the letter, a formal notice. She was now the majority shareholder of Holt & Sutter, a global investment group with interests in real estate, tech, and media. Mr. Gold watched her, gentle and patient. "Your grandmother asked me to protect your interests until you were ready," he said. "You are one of the wealthiest women in the country, Miss Weston. You don't owe Andrew anything. In fact, he doesn't even know who you really are. It was your grandmother's wish that your identity remain private until you needed to step into your power." Emma's mind raced. Why didn't she ever tell me all of this? I thought. "She wanted you to be loved for yourself, not your money," Mr. Gold explained. "She knew the world could be cruel to women with power. But now you have every resource you need to protect yourself and your child. And," he added with a small smile, "you have the means to write your own story." Emma's hands shook as she sifted through the documents. The numbers were dizzying. She was used to clipping coupons and checking bank balances before every purchase. The idea that she could buy an apartment, start a business, or even leave the country if she wanted without asking anyone's permission felt unreal. But slowly, reality set in. Emma felt her shoulders square, her breathing steady. Maybe this was what her grandmother meant. Not just freedom from Andrew, but the power to help others, to control her own fate. The humiliation, the public shaming, the heartbreak. It was all a storm she could weather, because she was not helpless. She was not a victim. For the first time since her life fell apart, Emma felt something like hope. Not just hope, determination. She met with Mr. Gold's legal team. She learned about her new holdings, about the philanthropic foundations her grandmother had set up, about the board seats that came with her name. She changed her phone number, hired private security, and moved to a more secure penthouse in the same city, this time with a view that stretched all the way to the horizon. She began to heal, one small step at a time. She started to see her therapist twice a week. She wrote letters to her unborn child, promising to do better, to be stronger, to make a world that was safe and loving. She made a plan to use her wealth quietly at first, supporting women's shelters and small businesses run by single mothers. She would not become cold or hard. She would use her pain as fuel. As the weeks passed, Emma's resolve grew. Her hair regained its shine, her eyes their light. She bought new clothes, not for anyone else, but for herself, to remind her who she was becoming. She met with a business coach and started sketching out ideas for her own nonprofit, inspired by her grandmother's legacy. One night, watching the city from her new balcony, Emma made a promise to herself and her child. "We will never let anyone write our story for us again." Word began to spread, quietly at first, that the abandoned wife was no longer living in the shadows. The tabloids tried to chase her, but her lawyers shut them down. The people who had mocked her, who had called her weak, began to wonder. Had they underestimated Emma Weston? The answer was yes. And her ex-husband was about to learn that the woman he'd discarded was not just surviving, she was about to take back everything and more. Emma Weston's transformation didn't happen overnight. Healing never does. For weeks, she was up before dawn, pacing her new penthouse apartment with a sense of purpose she'd almost forgotten she could feel. The pain of betrayal and public shaming still lingered, but it was no longer the center of her story. She was writing a new narrative now, one where she was the author, not the victim. She started each day with quiet rituals that grounded her. Hot tea by the window, gentle yoga, a journal where she scribbled hopes, fears, and fierce affirmations. "You are not small. You are not powerless." She said it out loud until her voice stopped trembling. She bought herself fresh flowers and arranged them in every room. No one was coming to rescue her, but she didn't need to be rescued anymore. The transformation was as much internal as external. Emma hired a stylist, not to impress anyone, but to help her rediscover what made her feel beautiful and strong. Out went the drab, supportive wife wardrobe. In came bold colors, crisp tailoring, clothes that celebrated her changing body and the life she carried. She cut her hair into a sleek bob, a visible line between her old life and the one she was claiming. The first time she looked in the mirror afterward, she almost didn't recognize herself. She smiled, a real smile. Emma's newfound power radiated into everything she did. She started joining networking groups under her own name, not Andrew's. When she walked into business meetings, she was met with surprise, sometimes even skepticism. After all, they'd seen the headlines, heard the gossip. But Emma didn't flinch. She let her ideas speak for themselves. When board members questioned her vision, she countered with hard numbers, calm confidence, and the authority that came from being the company's majority shareholder. She was no longer asking for a seat at the table. She was leading the meeting. The people who'd once dismissed her, the women who whispered at galas and the men who joked at her expense, began to pay attention. It wasn't just the money or the power. It was the way she carried herself, unapologetic, kind, and unbreakable. She wasn't interested in revenge for its own sake, but she was determined to use her resources to make real change. Emma's first major project was the launch of her nonprofit, Hope Rising Foundation, dedicated to helping women and children escape domestic abuse and rebuild their lives. She poured her energy into creating programs for job training, affordable childcare, and legal aid. Every press release, every fundraiser, every interview, she made sure the story was not about her ex-husband or her humiliation, but about the women she aimed to empower. Behind the scenes, Emma was quietly buying back control of properties Andrew had tried to sell off during their marriage. She met with lawyers and accountants, untangling the financial mess he'd left behind. Every victory, no matter how small, felt like reclaiming a piece of her dignity. She worked with her grandmother's advisors to restructure the family's business holdings so she could protect them and her child for generations to come. As her due date approached, Emma took time to rest and prepare for motherhood. But she didn't hide. She attended industry galas and charity balls, no longer clinging to the shadows. The first time she arrived at a high-profile event alone, wearing a midnight blue gown that hugged her pregnant belly and a pair of vintage diamond earrings, the cameras didn't know where to look. The same photographers who once pitied her now clamored for a shot. Inside the ballroom, whispers turned to awe. Emma was no longer the abandoned wife. She was a force, calm, radiant, and unmistakably in control. Old acquaintances, even some who'd once sided with Andrew, found reasons to congratulate her. Some apologized in awkward, halting ways. Emma accepted every apology with a quiet grace, but never forgot who'd stood by her and who hadn't. Her transformation was not just physical or financial, but spiritual. Emma forgave herself for the years she'd spent doubting her worth, for the nights she'd begged someone else to see her. She wrote her own rules now. In therapy, she worked through the guilt and anger, making peace with the woman she used to be. She told herself and her unborn child every day, "We are enough." Emma's comeback didn't go unnoticed by the press. From scandal to CEO, Emma Weston's stunning transformation read one headline: the new power player on the block. But Emma didn't care for the noise. What mattered was the community she was building, the safety she'd found for herself and her baby, and the future she could finally believe in. On the night before her son was born, Emma stood on her balcony overlooking the city that had once swallowed her whole. She felt her child's gentle kicks and whispered, "You saved me, little one. Now I'll save us both." She knew she could handle whatever tomorrow brought, no matter how many headlines, how many whispers, or how many men like Andrew crossed her path. The next morning, as the sun rose, Emma packed her hospital bag herself. She didn't need an entourage or anyone's permission. She called a car, signed a few final papers for a new business deal, and left a message with her legal team. "We're just getting started." Emma Weston was back, and this time she was unstoppable. The invitation arrived on heavy cream cardstock, embossed with gold leaf, elegant and unmistakable. It was for the Sapphire Hearts Charity Gala, the same event where just months before Emma Weston had been humiliated and cast aside. But this time the invite was addressed not to Mrs. Andrew Weston, but to Emma L. Weston, CEO, Hope Rising Foundation, event sponsor. The change was small but seismic. This was her entrance, her moment, and Emma knew it. Word of Emma's return to society had already rippled through the city's elite. Rumors swirled. Had she landed on her feet? Was she really as powerful as the whispers claimed? Was it true she'd walked away with more than just her dignity? Emma ignored the gossip. She focused on what mattered: her work, her child, and the final act that would close the door on her old life for good. On the night of the gala, Emma arrived in a custom gown of deep emerald velvet, her hair swept up, her eyes calm and clear. She was flanked not by a date, but by her board chair, a respected CEO, and two key female partners from her foundation. As she stepped out of the car, cameras flashed, reporters jostled, and guests paused to watch her ascend the steps. For the first time in her life, Emma didn't shrink from the attention. She accepted it, even welcomed it, knowing she had nothing left to hide. Inside, the ballroom buzzed with anticipation. Andrew Weston was already there, Lila on his arm, working the room. He looked older somehow, thinner, his smile a little too wide. He'd heard the rumors too, but hadn't believed them. Not really. He still expected Emma to be the woman he'd left behind, timid, apologetic, alone. When Emma entered, the orchestra fell silent for a beat. Conversations stopped. All eyes shifted to her. The event organizer rushed forward, nearly breathless, and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's lead sponsor, Emma Weston." The room erupted in applause, not out of pity, but respect. Emma walked the room with her head high. People reached out to shake her hand, to congratulate her on Hope Rising's rapid success, to compliment her on her courage. Some who'd shunned her before tried to reconnect. Others simply stared, stunned by the change. She was no longer the story's victim. She was its author. Andrew tried to approach her, but security, hired by Emma's team, intervened with smooth professionalism. "Miss Weston is occupied at the moment, Mr. Weston. Perhaps you can request a meeting through her office." The dismissal was public and deliberate. Andrew flushed, his composure faltering. Lila looked Emma up and down, eyes sharp, searching for any weakness. She found none. Emma met her gaze with calm indifference, then turned her attention back to her conversation with the senator's wife about a new citywide education initiative. Lila, feeling invisible, excused herself and disappeared into the crowd. As dinner was served, Emma took her seat at the head table. When the evening's program began, the MC introduced her for the keynote address. Emma stood, her presence commanding, and the room quieted. She spoke not of her personal story, but of her foundation's work, of single mothers given second chances, of children finding safety and hope, of building something lasting out of loss. She spoke with quiet conviction and humor, never mentioning Andrew or Lila by name, but everyone in the room knew the subtext. This was a woman who had been broken and rebuilt herself into something unbreakable. The standing ovation at the end of her speech was thunderous. Emma smiled, thanked the crowd, and stepped aside for the auction, the night's real purpose: raising millions for women in need. As the evening wore on, Emma took a private moment on the balcony, gazing out at the city skyline. She was joined by the board chair, who handed her a glass of sparkling water and said, "You did it, Emma. You changed the story." Inside, Andrew's world was crumbling. The deals he'd counted on were slipping away. Investors who once called him a genius now wanted meetings with Emma instead. Even Lila seemed distant, sensing his fall from grace. For the first time, Andrew was no longer the room's center of gravity. He was just another man, watching a woman he'd underestimated take back the spotlight. Before she left, Emma made her way past Andrew. He tried to catch her attention, desperation creeping into his voice. "Emma, can we talk? Just for a minute." She paused, looked him in the eye, and said with quiet finality, "There's nothing left to say, Andrew. Good luck." Her voice was kind, but unyielding. She walked away, leaving him behind, and was soon surrounded by allies and friends, her laughter ringing clear and bright above the music. The night ended with Hope Rising surpassing its fundraising goal, and Emma's name on everyone's lips, not as a tragedy but as a force for good. As she stepped into her car, she glanced back at the glowing ballroom. The chapter was closed. Her revenge was not cruel or loud. It was simply living well, loving her child, and making a difference. Emma Weston had reclaimed her life, her legacy, and her story. And she did it in full view of the world. The city that once swallowed her whole was now Emma Weston's kingdom. As the sun rose over the skyline, the world outside seemed fresh and full of promise. Emma stood in her penthouse nursery, holding her newborn son against her chest, watching the dawn break through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The baby slept peacefully, his tiny fingers curled around hers, each breath a gentle assurance that life could begin again, no matter how brutally it was once interrupted. She had come so far from the woman who had been humiliated and cast aside. In those first desperate days, she couldn't imagine ever feeling safe, much less powerful. But as she cradled her child, Emma knew she was more than a survivor. She was a builder, a creator, a mother, and a leader. She'd taken every wound and transformed it into strength. She'd used her pain as a map, not a prison. Her journey had become a legend in the city. Magazines, podcasts, and social media feeds were flooded with stories of her transformation. Not the salacious gossip that once haunted her, but articles on her foundation's successes, interviews where she spoke honestly about heartbreak, motherhood, and resilience. Women wrote to her by the hundreds, sharing their own struggles and thanking her for making them feel seen. "You showed me it's never too late," one message read. "If you can rise, so can I." Emma answered every letter she could. She hosted small gatherings at Hope Rising's headquarters, bringing together women who'd survived abuse, betrayal, and abandonment. In each story she heard, she saw pieces of her old self, frightened, uncertain, desperate for a lifeline. She reminded every woman who came through her doors, "You are not broken. You are not alone. No one gets to decide your worth but you." She became a mentor, a role model, and a quiet force for change. She was invited to speak at universities, business forums, and women's leadership summits. Her message was always the same: strength isn't found in never falling, but in rising after every fall. Power, she said, is not about controlling others, but about choosing your own story when others want to write it for you. One crisp autumn evening, Emma hosted a gala at the same hotel where her public humiliation began. But now, every detail of the event carried her signature. The centerpieces were designed by local survivors, the dinner was catered by a women-owned business, and the guest list was filled with people who believed in second chances. When Emma took the stage, she looked into the sea of faces, remembering her own journey from invisibility to influence. She told her story, not for pity but for hope. She spoke of loss, but also of the courage it took to rebuild. "I was left for dead by the man who promised to love me," she said. "But I was never truly lost. I just hadn't found my voice yet." The room fell silent, hanging on her every word. "If you remember nothing else, remember this. You are never powerless as long as you have your truth. There is no shame in starting over. There is only strength in refusing to stay silent." The applause was thunderous, but Emma didn't measure her impact by standing ovations. It was in the faces of the women who hugged her after the speech, in the phone calls from girls who dreamed bigger because of her, in the knowledge that her son would grow up seeing his mother as a champion, not a casualty. Andrew Weston's name faded from the headlines, replaced by stories of his missteps, his lost deals, his eventual obscurity. Sometimes Emma felt a pang of sorrow for the man he once was, but never regret. She wished him well from afar, but her life was no longer shadowed by his choices. She had outgrown that chapter. He had become the cautionary tale, not her. Emma's life was not perfect. There were still lonely nights, moments of doubt, and scars that ached when the world was too quiet. But now she had tools: her community, her son, her foundation, and her own belief in herself. She wasn't fearless, but she was unstoppable. She had learned to set boundaries, to trust her instincts, and to lead with both compassion and clarity. As the years passed, Emma watched Hope Rising become a national movement. Women across the country opened chapters, creating safe havens and opportunity networks in small towns and big cities alike. Survivors became leaders. Children grew up believing in happy endings that didn't require a prince or a rescue, just courage, hard work, and love. Emma never forgot the warning her own story gave to the world: never underestimate a woman pushed to the edge. Never assume her silence means surrender. Behind every quiet strength there is a fire waiting to rise. She spoke it into the world, again and again, as both a promise and a challenge. To every woman who's been told she's replaceable, powerless, or alone, stand up. Your comeback will write the ending. One evening, as city lights glittered and her son giggled in her lap, Emma Weston looked at the world she'd built and smiled. Hers was not a fairy tale. It was something better, a victory earned every day, by never giving up. So the story has ended. And my wonderful friends, Are you still here with me right now? If you're listening until this very moment, I know there must be something in Emma's journey that speaks to your own heart. Maybe you felt betrayed, underestimated, or lost, just like her. But here's the real message. No matter how deeply you fall, you can rise again. And not just rise, but become stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than ever before. Emma's journey reminds us that we are never powerless as long as we choose our own story. In the words of heterodox wisdom, the wound is the place where the light enters you. Healing doesn't erase the pain, but it transforms it into fuel for a brighter future. So if you've ever been made to feel small, remember, your comeback will write your ending. If you found a piece of hope or strength in this story, please like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment that moved you most? I want to hear your voice, because this community is for you.